Hello, everyone, and welcome to Microsoft Learn Live. I'm going to be presenting with my co-host Jennifer as well on Azure Governance. So just introduce myself. My name is Alexandra Miller-Brown. I'm a customer engineer in our FastTrack for Azure organization, and I'd like to pass off to Jennifer just to introduce herself as well.
Thanks. Hi, Jennifer Wagman here, another engineer from our FastTrack for Azure organization.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. So today we're going to be presenting on Azure Governance. Also joined with us today is a couple of moderators in our team. So first we have Aaron Roden, who's a senior customer engineer, also in the FastTrack for Azure organization, and Vanessa Brewer, also a senior customer engineer as well in FTA. So in the chat, if you have any questions or anything, our lovely engineers will help you out as well. Just also wanted to highlight, so the content that we have today is also in a collection called Azure Governance. So this is the official Microsoft collection where we have our GitHub content that is associated with this and also Learn modules. So you can take the Azure journey even further by doing a lot of those self-paced courses that are offered through our Learn modules as well. So to start out for our learning objectives today, with Azure Governance, we want to go into developing different methods around organizing our resources in Azure. Next, after that, we're going to go into some best practices around access control, so how to provision different roles and things like that to our users in our organizations. Then we're going to go into managing policy and compliance within your organization. So making sure that users within our environments are keeping track with our guardrails that we have in place for organization. And then finally, we're going to go into some cost management tools so we can see how we can optimize our different resources in Azure and also monitor our cloud spend. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer.
Thank you. So getting started with your cloud governance journey. So ultimately, we are focusing this conversation around the cloud governance topic. The cloud governance topic is highlighted in the Cloud Adoption Framework documentation that we support through the Microsoft Learn site. And the govern tenant is one of the core tenants that makes up that organization of documents. So in doing this journey of defining your cloud governance strategy, there's a couple different areas that we encourage you to walk through as you go through this process. So the first one being ultimately defining your methodology for governance. So as I mentioned, the Cloud Adoption Framework provides guidelines, best practices, recommendations for you to organize your resources and manage your resources in accordance with our recommended strategies. So we do recommend, if you haven't seen any of this documentation before, that can be super helpful to get started and give you some really easy first steps for defining your strategy. The second thing that we're going to recommend you do in this journey is to establish a benchmark for your governance strategy. So if you haven't already, we recommend that you assess your current state, document that, and that gives you a baseline where you can improve off of with your governance planning. And then from there, you'll move on to actually implementing your governance strategy. So if you are new to Azure or new to any cloud in general, you're going to start with initially kind of establishing those practices and then finding the right tools to align with your organization's requirements. Once you have that foundation in place, you can begin migrating your workloads, or if you've already migrated your workloads, this may be an ongoing practice where you will continue to evolve your governance foundation over time. So you will come back to the governance topics repeatedly. This isn't a one-time process that you will do at the beginning of your cloud journey. We do recommend it at the beginning of your cloud journey, but you will be continuously evolving the strategy as time goes on. So I mentioned the cloud adoption framework. So talking a little bit more about that, you can see sort of how we organize this governance model. So ultimately, we want to define our corporate policies, and that's really what governance is. It's the act of being in compliance with your organization's policies. So a couple core things there that we want to focus on, your business risks, so identifying and understanding the risks that are critical to your organization, aligning with the policy and compliance requirements that you might have. So converting those risks into policy statements, and then supporting them through your compliance requirements. And then ultimately processes, which is ensuring that you adhere to the policies that you've defined previously. So the 5 disciplines of cloud governance are broken down into the list that you see here. So we have a couple different tenants. We have cost management, which is where you will be evaluating and monitoring your costs, limiting your IT spend, and ultimately trying to make sure that the ownership and accountability of the individuals who need those resources aligns to your resources that are deployed. Next would be your security baseline, ensuring that you have compliance with your IT security requirements. We'll be going through some different strategies and tools you can use to manage that. Resource consistency, ensuring that you have a consistent resource configuration. So making sure that the practices that you have defined in your cloud governance strategy are applicable and applied to all of your resources. So making sure again that this is just assigned at scale, not just for any single resource. Defining your identity baseline. So making sure that you have the appropriate levels of access control and you're not giving out too much access to your resources. And then we have deployment accelerations where we are giving you some tools to accelerate deployment and centralizing consistency and standardizing your deployment processes. Okay, so in today's session, we are going to be using a sort of scenario of a fake company here that we're going to be calling Trey Research. And this is just going to be giving us sort of a guideline to follow throughout the demos that we're going to walk through today with Alexandra. So a little background on the scenario that we have provided. We're starting with a really simple customer here. They are a market research company. They're new to Azure and they're looking to gain some foundational knowledge and how to set up their governance strategy. So we are assuming that they have no resources or very few resources already in Azure. And we want to walk through the processes of applying our recommended governance best practices. So just a little bit more context here. We have Trey Research's current department structure includes a few departments, and you'll see sort of where these fall into the organization of the environment later. But those departments are IT, finance, human resources, and legal. So just keeping it really simple here with this scenario. And we aren't going to go through the full process of capturing the benchmark assessment for governance. The tool just takes quite a few questions. It's essentially a poll of all of the current state of your governance strategy. So you can kind of see some very small little images here, but ultimately we do recommend that you start with this if you haven't captured that baseline. So there is a short AKS link here, aka.ms/adopt gov-assess. And we'll put those links in the chat for you as we continue onward. But that's a helpful tool. If you haven't used it yet, it's a great tool just to capture your starting state with governance. And this is just a quick little snippet. We did beforehand go through and conduct a quick benchmark assessment for our Trey research scenario. So you can see here the blue boxes, the lighter blue here, those are indicative of the current state of our Trey research organization. The business priorities are these dark blue columns, which is showing us what our goal is in reaching our governance state. And then you can see the industry benchmark and the average here. So you can see that governance is not necessarily being prioritized as high as it should, but we really want to make sure that today you walk away understanding why governance is important and how ultimately having a really good governance strategy can make your cloud adoption process and migration processes so much easier. Okay, so we are going to get into some of the different scenarios and tools under the governance topic. So to start out, if you are not familiar, Azure Resource Manager is the deployment and management service for Azure. So this is the back end of our Azure platform. So it provides the management layer. It allows you to enable, create, update, and delete resources in your Azure environment. It's going to allow you to modify features, handle compliance tooling, organize your resources in different hierarchies, and ultimately monitor and manage your resources long term. So the Azure Resource Manager, or ARM tool, is going to handle the requests when you decide to take any action on your Azure resources. It receives that request. Its role then is to authenticate and authorize that request, and then forward it to the appropriate service in Azure. So that's just a little bit of background on what Azure Resource Manager is and sort of where it fits into the bigger picture. And then the next thing that we are going to start to talk about is the resource organization. So this is the hierarchy, the structure, really the framework of what your environment looks like. So a couple things here. What you see listed is management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. So when we talk about these different things, what we are talking about is the scope where your resources are being managed. So an individual resource, if you're looking at the diagram here, it's the smallest little icon there in the center. So you may have some virtual machines, you may have a SQL database, you might have a virtual network. Those are your individual resources. And those resources then get grouped into resource groups, which are just logical containers for you to organize your resources and then to apply management tools, access control, or compliance restrictions. So going above that, we have our subscriptions, which are sort of similar to your resource groups in that they are a logical container, but they are a larger container. And typically your billing is associated to your subscription. So that's kind of the larger container that organizes all of your resource groups. And then you have your management groups, which are a hierarchy above your subscriptions. So when you have your Azure environment set up, there's an identity piece that will be in place, which is called Azure Active Directory, and that is where all of your identity and roles are going to be managed. Under that identity tenant, you will have a root management group that is aligned to that tenant. And then below that, you can create a different level of hierarchical structure above your subscriptions. So with that in mind, we're going to start to talk a little bit about some of our best practices around using management groups. So when we're talking about this hierarchy, what we really want to define is the way that your organization can best manage your resources. So what is the simplest way for you to make sure that your permissions are aligned to the users who need them, and that those permissions are somewhat restrictive in nature, so we're not giving out extra permissions where they aren't needed, and then ultimately assigning policy at scale so that we can allow inheritance to do some of the work for us, and we're not repeating or duplicating our efforts. So with that, talking about management group best practices. So you can see here we do have just a simple structure where you can see there's several resource groups here. We've got lots of subscriptions in place. And then above that, we do have some management groups that are being created. So we have, in this scenario, we've broken it out into production, development, and quality assurance groups. And then we have subscriptions that are associated to those different areas below that. And then obviously the resource groups below that. In this scenario, they actually have resource groups also organized by application. We'll talk a little bit about the different ways that you can manage that. Okay. So a bit on subscription design. So we did see previously that you can have different levels of hierarchy with your management groups. And actually just jumping back to that really quick, if you aren't familiar, you can actually have multiple levels of hierarchy. So when you see here that there's the corporate IT management group and then the production below that, you can actually have multiple different levels below that. So you could have up to 6 additional vertical levels of hierarchy in there. So keeping that in mind as we talk about subscription structure, you can ultimately then break up your subscriptions into much more granular containers, which would allow you to have more personalized controls over those individual subscriptions. So if you're taking a look here, some things that you may want to keep in mind when you are designing how you want to separate out your subscriptions and organize your resources. You may want to break up your subscriptions by business requirements. So if you have different groups responsible for billing or accountable for billing, you may want to break your subscriptions up according to that to simplify your charging models. If you have limits or restrictions around auditing or compliance, that may also be a really great use case for breaking up your subscriptions. You may want to take an application focus or approach where maybe you have subscriptions aligned to mission critical workloads. So those could be in examples where you might have regulatory requirements like HIPAA or FedRAMP that you need to abide by, and you want to make sure that everything in that subscription complies with those requirements. That allows you to sort of centralize those controls to that singular subscription. There's other strategies we can take as well. We have functional strategies aligning to your business organization department. So maybe organizing according to your finance team, sales teams, IT teams. And then you may also be interested in taking a geographic approach. If you have requirements around data residency or GDPR, where you need to make sure that your resources are residing in the regions that are approved for you. That might be another strategy too, to make sure that your resources are contained within that subscription. So lots of things to consider. We do have lots of different models that you can follow for your own environment. Again, our documentation is really thorough, and the collection that we shared previously and we'll share again at the end does walk through some of these examples as well. Okay. And then we're just quickly going to run through resource groups, and then we're going to jump into a bit of a demo with Alexandra, and she's going to show you how to actually organize these resources, create your resource groups, move things around. So be a bit more interesting in just a second. So resource groups are your logical containers, like I mentioned. And the way that we think about these is it's a way to logically group resources that are related for some purpose. That might be related based on the application that they support. It might be related based on the accountability or ownership of that resource. So perhaps your administrative team is centralized to one group and you want to organize your resources based on their access permissions. It could also be based on the type of service. So maybe grouping together your networking resources or your data resources or your virtual machine resources. So lots of ways that you can group these together. And to kind of go back to that topic of scope, your resource groups, your subscriptions, and your management groups are all different points for you to be able to apply policies for regulatory compliance, to apply your permissions for access control, and to apply policies that might enforce things like enrolling and monitoring or backup services. So again, these are just different scopes, and ultimately the lower you go down in those scopes, so from the management group down to your resource groups, you're kind of looking at an inheritance structure. So anything that you would apply at a management group inherits all the way down through. So that sort of gives you the idea of the benefit of using things like management groups. Okay, so with that, we're going to jump over to Alexandra, and she's going to walk us through an interesting demo to kind of highlight how you can organize all of these things.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. So as the portal loads up here in a minute, you can see this is our overview page. So we've already deployed a few resources and things to get started, but just to illustrate some of the topics that Jennifer was mentioning with management groups. So in the portal, we're going to go over to management groups. And then, as you can see, we already have kind of a starter section when it comes to the management group level. So we have our trade research right here under our tenant root group. And then underneath that, we have different types of containers to represent the different types of needs. So for example, we have a decommissioned one. And so for this one, if you have any subscriptions that would be on the way to being decommissioned, you can have that in this one. And then under the management group that is for landing zones, we have the Corp IT that Jennifer was mentioning earlier. So just to go in to get started, let's say we want to create a department management group underneath here. So we wanted to put something for our production subscription that we see up there. So we're going to go in and press create. And now here is where we can create the management group ID. So for this, we're just going to call it, we have our name convention, little sneak preview before we get into it a bit more with Jennifer after. But we're going to put in here the Core IT prod group. So this is just an indicator to say any sort of production-wise groups would be placed under this. And then I'm just going to copy it for also it to be the display name and then submit it in here. And as it's updating the group, we will be able to see it in a moment. But as that's updating, just wanted to also explain a couple of the other ones that we have here as some basic starter ones. So we have a platform group as well. And this is mainly for a lot of the shared services that you may have within your organization. And then also we have a sandbox. So if we want to play around with different things or test out things in Azure, we can do so here. So I'm just going to refresh now that that has finished completing. And underneath here, we can see Corp IT Prod Group. So this is a great way to organize it underneath it and make sure that we have everything aligned. So now let's say we want to move this production one over to the prod group. Right here, I can see my management group for it to be the parent of, which would be the Management Corp IT Prod Group. And so I'm just going to save this. And now, as Jennifer was saying, any like policies or any RBAC policies or things like that that would be underneath this management group is now going to be applied to it. So we have really a trickle down kind of policy when it comes to this hierarchy. Also, just to quickly touch on our subscription itself, we're going to go into it and just see our resource group here. So now we have our logical containers that our resource groups are available for in the Azure portal. We have a couple starter ones right now that I'm just going to look quickly into. So this one we set up just a hub and spoke network topology within here. And we have some resources available. So this just helps to keep us organized when it comes to making sure what we know, what the resources are needed for. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer as to go into those naming conventions I was mentioning earlier.
Perfect. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, so talking a little bit about naming standards. So of course, you can really name your Azure resources just about anything that you want. There are some restrictions and some guidelines around what those names can be around length, characters that you used. But ultimately, you have a lot of free reign in how you name your resources. But what we want to recommend here is that having well-defined naming conventions is going to be of benefit to you in the long term. If you take the time during the beginning phases of your cloud adoption journey to define what these are. So with that in mind, well-defined naming conventions are a way for you to ultimately quickly locate and manage your resources. So effective naming conventions are going to be composing resource names with important information about your resource. So again, giving you tools to help quickly identify what that resource is, what it's used for, who owns it, where it's located, those types of characteristics. So along with that, having that good name allows you to accurately represent that name during critical scenarios. So a lot of our monitoring and security tools are going to be showing you resources by their names in reports or in any of the monitoring tooling. So if you're just seeing a name of a resource and it's a fairly generic name and you have now a critical security incident that you need to follow through on, you need to take some additional steps. It helps to be able to quickly identify again what that resource is, what the scale of that resource is, what workload that resource is supporting so that you can quickly adapt and move forward and address that security concern. So with that in mind, on the slide, you can see a couple different naming components that we would recommend that you consider. So resource type would be a really important one. So identifying what the resource is by the type. So that might be using an abbreviation like a VNet for virtual network. It may be using something like RG for resource group. maybe using a VM for virtual machines. So you're kind of getting the idea here, just quickly being able to identify what it is, the business unit that it's associated to. So if it's part of a specific workload or department, you may want to associate that. Again, application or service name. So if it's supporting a specific app, really helpful to identify again, this is the underlying infrastructure. What are we hosting with this? So that you can level or measure the level of impact that you might have. The subscription purpose. So you can also use these to identify if you're working with a production resource, a dev resource, a quality assurance resource, a test resource. So again, being able to identify, is this something customer facing or is this something internal? And then the region, if you are deploying in multiple regions, it would be beneficial for you to be able to quickly identify the location where that resource resides. Again, maybe it's some type of impact to one resource, or maybe it's something regional that you need to be looking into further. So again, helpful to have those pieces of information there. Along with that, on the right side of the slide there, you can see there are some suggested names or some example names that you can use to get started. So using some of those different naming components, we have here a VNet shared East US 001. So that might be describing a virtual network that is in a shared business unit, so possibly a virtual network that's shared across multiple workloads or applications. And that would be residing in the East US 2 data center. And then that might be the first instance of that type. So possibly there's multiple in that region, or including those instance counts actually allows you to have scale in the future. So even if you are only planning to have one instance, it may still be beneficial for you to include those numbers from the beginning to support your future cloud goals. And last call out on the naming topic, there is a tool that we have recently put together that allows you to simplify the naming process. So in some of our documentation, you can see it's quite lengthy and all of the requirements for generating names for all of your resources. And obviously there's dozens, if not hundreds, of services in Azure. So understanding and knowing what all of the naming restrictions are for each resource can be very tedious. So we have a tool called the Azure Naming Tool, which is a way for you to generate names. You can put in what pieces of information you want associated with each type of resource, and you'll get a nice little output of some names that you are ready to use and apply to your resources. So it's a really helpful tool if you are just beginning the process of standardizing your names. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about tags. So obviously names is going to be a way for you to include some information about your resources. Tags are a way to fill in the blanks for everything that names couldn't provide. So there are limitations around names, around length for different service types. So you may not have the capacity to put all of the information about a resource in its name. So that's where tags really comes in. It's a way for you to associate metadata to that resource without including it in a name or naming convention. So essentially what tags are is they are name value pairs. So you can see in the diagram there is a name with an example using department, and then the value would be the department with which we are associating this to. So this example here is using finance. So you might have department IT, department finance, department sales, and then you can tag all of the resources that support the workloads that fall under those departments. So your resources can have up to 15 tags. There are lots of tags that you can start with. There are some recommended ones in our cloud adoption framework documentation to get you started. But top of mind, a couple that you might want to include would be environment. So production, test, dev, if you don't have that included in the name, that's another great way to represent where in your business this resource is operating. Obviously, we use the example of department. If you're interested in doing any type of cost tracking with chargeback or showback models, tags are a really great way to identify those resources and group them, and also generate reports that will give you information around costs associated to that cost center or a specific workload or even an application. And then the last example that we're just highlighting here would be lifecycle and automation. So tags are actually a great tool to integrate with some of our automated services. So if you wanted to automate patching or automate scale, you can actually filter those resources by their tags that are associated. So if you wanted to have resources update on a schedule, you might tag them with the update schedule information, and that would be linked to possibly an update management or automation account that would actually run the patching cycle for you. And then just quickly, we'll highlight here the tagging decision guide. So again, there's lots of different ways that you can define your tags, and there are some of those limitations around how many you can apply. So you want to make sure that you are hitting the high points here, that you are getting the most critical tags associated. So defining, what are your functional tags? Are you using any tags that help you classify the data on those resources? Do you need to have tags for accounting purposes, for tracking costs? Are you associating this with any partnership? Is this owned by a cloud service provider or a partner who is managing that resource, and you want to make sure that they understand their level of ownership? Or purpose, again, just understanding if it's associated to an application or workload, just being able to quickly identify it with some of that metadata. Okay, last slide for me, and then we're going to do some more demo with Alexandra to show off all of these things we just talked about. So resource locks are another really, really useful governance tool. So what a resource lock does is it provides a way for you to essentially lock changes or deletion behavior on your critical resources. So let's say that you take the time, you establish your foundation of all of your Azure resources, you get your landing zone ready and your networking configured, and you want to make sure that while you are maybe migrating workloads into that environment, that your networking configuration is not going to change. And even long term, your production environment probably isn't being changed that frequently. So making sure that those changes are limited and restricted. So obviously we can do that with permissions and restricting behavior based on individuals' roles. But there can also be accidents that happen, and this is a way to prevent those accidental behaviors or even malicious behaviors should there be security concerns with your identity. So resource locks, again, they're a way for you to lock resources from changing behavior. So there's two types of locks that we see. There are read-only locks, which will prevent any change behavior whatsoever. So you can't modify a resource, you can't update a resource, so you can really just keep it in its current state. And then there's the cannot delete lock, which is going to allow modification and allow changes, but prevent deletion of that resource. So just making sure that no one is able to come in and completely remove that resource. There is no undo button for most deletes in Azure, so that is something that you want to be very careful of. So with that, Alexandra is going to jump in and do some demos of all of these services.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. So just to go through, we're going to start back out at our subscription level here. And let's say I want to create a storage account within my environment. So I'm just going to go over to resources and then add in a storage account. So here I'm just going to type in storage account in the Azure Marketplace. And so here I have it to create one. So in regards to our scenario, let's say we want to have me and Jennifer trying to figure out how to keep all of our documents in one place when it comes to our market research, for-trade research. I already have this resource group here, so we're going to go to this, and here it has the naming standard that we want to keep. So, RG Corp IT Docs, and we did the 001 just to indicate numerically. And then going into this as well, so we're going to start out with ST, and then we can say marketing docs for ourselves. So here we can have the storage account, and we know the purpose is for it to be marketing docs, and then also add in that 001 just to indicate it could be the first of many iterations. I'm going to go over actually to the tagging portion of this and just keep the defaults when we're coming to this. So now that we have these, we can put in the department. And so I'm just going to add in the marketing department underneath here so we can have this resource be tagged with that department tag that we were talking about earlier. Then we're going to go into review and see that everything is validated, so it's approved for us to create. And so now the deployment is initializing, and then also calling back to the ARM templates as well. This is the Azure Resource Manager at work, putting in the storage portion of this as well. So while this deployment is in progress, let's go back over to our subscription and then into our resource group. And now it's succeeded. So as we refresh this, one more time, we'll just, we could demonstrate on this one. Okay, here you go. We have our marketing docs. So now we see that this document, we really don't want to lose any of our marketing docs because that research is pretty important. We put in a lot of time and effort into that. So now we're going to go down to our locks and indicate that we want to add the lock here. So we'll just name this do not delete docs. And here we can specify the lock types that Jennifer was mentioning. So we'll put in the delete lock type. So we just have to say critical marketing documents for us to keep. So we hit OK. And now see we have this delete type lock on here. So now let's say we have another user that's in here and they're just, they saw this marketing account document storage and they're like, okay, let me move something, but accidentally press delete. Oh, okay, it already stopped us from doing that. So resource locks can be very important in just making sure that we don't have anything that is critical to our deployments get deleted or misplaced in any sort of way. Great. So now we're just going to go back and I'm going to hand it back over to Jennifer just to let us go through RBAC, so just our way of provisioning a lot of the access control within Azure.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about the identity piece of the governance strategy. So when we talk about RBAC, that just stands for Role-Based Access Control. And Role-Based Access Control is just the fine-grained access control permissions that are assigned to the Azure control plane. So there's a couple pieces that make up RBAC, or Role-Based Access Control. So the first being the security principle. So security principle can take form in a couple different ways. It might be an individual user or user account. It would be a group that you've created in Azure AD, or it could even be a group that you've synced from an on-prem Active Directory group to Azure AD. It could also be a service principal account, which is essentially like an app account or managed account for identity. So your security principal is essentially the account that the permissions will be applied to. The second piece is the role, which is defining the permissions themselves. So what can you do? What can you not do? What is allowed within the scope of the role? And then we have the scope, which is the level where we are actually assigning those permissions and who we are giving access to those permissions. So scope we talked about earlier in the hierarchy. So we have at the very, very bottom, you have the individual resource. And then as we kind of climb up that hierarchy, we have our resource groups, we have subscriptions, and then we also have the management groups. And it's important to keep in mind, I think we mentioned this earlier, that the higher up you go in scope, you are also taking into consideration inheritance. So if you are applying access control to a subscription, the roles that you assign to that subscription will be inherited through all of the resource groups and all of the resources that are within that subscription. So we want to take a least privilege approach as we are assigning our access controls. So we want to make sure that we are minimizing the reach that these permissions will have. So if we are giving out, access to an individual virtual machine, we want to make sure that we are assigning access to the VM itself. We're not giving access at the management group level, which would allow inheritance to many, many other resources that are not needed. So it's keeping things really fine-grained and controlled and making sure that we're only giving out permissions that are needed and appropriate, and making sure that we're only giving them out at the scope that is appropriate as well. And okay, slide, jump ahead. Oh, we went one too far. Okay.
No worries. Awesome. So I see we also have a question from David B on YouTube. So would you recommend adding blocks to a resource group or specific resources?
So I think, oh yeah, do you want to answer?
Either way.
Go ahead.
I can start, yeah. Okay, so for adding blocks within our Azure environment, they are similar to management groups where it falls down in the hierarchy. And so if you add it, say, for example, to like a shared services resource group, that will trickle down into the other resources as well. So really for the critical resources, we really recommend doing that. And then Jennifer, if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I was going to say it really also depends on how you structure your resource groups. So if you are organizing them according to, the type of service, so maybe you put all your networking resources in one resource group and those aren't changed frequently, it might make sense to put a lock on that resource group. Whereas if you might be looking at organizing your resource groups by application, you may have a variety of different types of resources under that group, where maybe it only makes sense to apply it to one or two resources under that. So it really does come down to how you choose to structure everything. There's not really a right or wrong way to apply it. It's just making sure that you have it on the appropriate level. So consider that. And that can also be a really great way to determine how you organize your resource groups as well. So if you know that there are groups of resources that you intend to have locked together, it's a great way to plan your strategy around how you want to create that resource group structure.
Exactly. Awesome.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I don't think we actually had any more on the RBAC slide. So Alexandra, do you want to walk
Yeah,
us through a bit on RBAC? Thanks.
for sure. Yeah. We can head over to the portal then just to go through it. Awesome. And so here we're back at our subscription page. And now we're going to be exploring just the principles of adding in users through access control. And so here we have where we can add in those role assignments that Jennifer was talking about. So let's wait for this to load. And so as you can see, there is a lot of different types of role within Azure. And you can really have access to over 200 roles that we have already available for you built in, and it makes it easier just to provision. So for our example, let's say I want to put Jennifer as a network contributor within our environment for production. So we want to make sure that she can manage a lot of different networks, but doesn't have like complete access to them. So as you can see, we have this built-in role here. And then even through here in the portal as well, you can view the permissions that are specific for this role. It's not showing all of them right now because there's a lot when it comes to networking. And so this role has a lot of different types of read and write permissions.
Hey,
So
Alexandra, quick question.
yeah, sure.
So if you are new to Azure and you want to kind of highlight the primary roles within the environment, can you maybe just talk about some of the most common ones that people tend to use and sort of the differences between those from a high level? Because we see owner and contributor brought up with networking and VM. What
Yeah.
does that mean?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. Definitely. So the three, I would say, like major types of roles that are put into Azure, and if you saw within my like search, it was probably the owner, contributor, and reader. So owner, think of it, they own everything, able to do everything within Azure. This is a role that we don't want to give out too easily because we want to make sure that everyone has their sort of access that they need. But say if you are like the owner for an application or things like that, we can keep up with owner. Contributor is the next like mostly seen role. And so through here, it lets you do almost everything, but not quite. You could do everything an owner, but except you can't assign different roles and things like that. So you can't manage the RBAC as well. And then finally, reader is another role we see that's pretty standard. And with Reader, it allows you just have like a view only thing of everything within the Azure portal, but you can't really make changes to anything. So these are very like common typical roles that we see within Azure that are being applied to all different types of subscriptions. Awesome. But yeah, so Continuing with, this is the network contributor role that I'm assigning you, Jennifer, at this one. It's a bit more, a bit more granular. It's very specific only to networking tasks, so it really puts in that principle of least privilege of making sure that different types of personas have the appropriate level of contributions. So within this role, we have our selected role here, and then we have the security principles that Jennifer was talking about when it comes to the user group or service principal, and also managed identity. In this case, we're just going to do the user group or service principal and add Jennifer. So select. And then at this point, we're going to review and assign. And so here we have just a review of everything when it comes to the role, what scope it's available at, and then the member. So we're going to assign Jennifer that role within our subscription. And then as we can see in the assignments, she is assigned this network contributor role at this resource. Now, if you can see underneath here as well, anything that you assign at a higher level is also inherited. So I have a role assigned owner from the management group level, so I'm owner also in this subscription. So this just illustrates a lot about that hierarchy and scope that we've been talking about and how it really applies to everything when it comes to this.
Alexandra, with this screen here, it's interesting. So you show that I have roles as both a reader and as a network contributor. So with that, the reader is being applied at the management group here, right? So I can see everything that's under that management group, but I can only contribute or manage the item here where I have this network contributor role.
Exactly.
So with that, can you maybe talk about, let's say somebody has an owner level or a contributor level over a management group. Is there a way to take away those permissions?
For the management group level?
Yeah, at a lower scope, like could you revoke them?
So if they have an owner, they're the only ones that could really modify when it comes to the role assignments as well. So as I added you, and as you can see here too, it's pretty additive on the roles, right? So you can add on different types of things. So they can only really get rid of things that are, owners can only really get rid of things that are within the portal.
So you can really only like elevate permissions. You can't reduce them as you go down in the hierarchy.
Yeah, so exactly.
Okay.
So it's like basically you can go through that.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks. So awesome. And then just also wanted to touch on adding custom roles. So I know, as you can see, there's a bunch of different types of roles, and let's say it's just not meeting the exact specific need that you would want. So here you can add a custom role. And so with the custom role name, let's say I'm going to do virtual machine operator as my custom role that I want. So I want this really specific role where I want to make sure that I can only start or restart virtual machines in Azure. Now, with this, you can either start off with cloning a different type of role. So, using one of those roles that we saw earlier, you can either start from scratch or you can start from a JSON. So with this, I already had preloaded a JSON available for this role. And so JSON, just the background is like a formatted programming construct. And so here you can see just the different permissions that would be applied for this. So within here, you can view all the different permissions that are available. And then if we click next, within this, I also provided different scopes. So for example, with this, it's only available at this management group level or the subscription within it. And then this is just a little sneak peek into the JSON that you can see here. And it outlines basically the permissions and assignable scopes that were put in. So finally, we just do review and create. And so this custom role is created within the scope of these two, so the subscription and the management group. So if you would want to apply those different places, you can. Awesome. So Let's see if that role applied. So that's it. Machine operator. And so now we can apply this role to others in our space. Great. So I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer now, and we're going to go through Azure Policy next.
Cool, thanks. Just a quick call out because one of our moderators highlighted something in the topic of locks that I think is really important that we share with everyone if you missed the comment, that locks do not lock transactions within databases. So when we talk about locking modifications, you're not actually locking the behavior within it. You're locking the configuration or the state of that resource from the platform management perspective. So that's a really good call out. So great suggestion that we add that there.
That is a good call out. Yeah.
So we'll jump in a bit to Azure Policy here next. So talking a little bit about what is Azure Policy. So Policy is the tool in Azure that we have to allow you to create, assign, and manage policy. And that can be essentially just a collection of rules to enforce compliance requirements. It could be enforcing things like regional allowed regions for your resources. It can be used to enforce naming conventions, it can be used to enforce your tagging standards. So lots of different ways that you can use Azure Policy. So with that, policy is essentially defining the perimeter of what is allowed or compliant behavior, and then assigning a condition to when resources are out of compliance. So there's a couple different states or effects that you might see when working with Azure Policy. So Alexandra's going to show several of them as we go into a demo, but just to highlight the most common ones you'll typically see are an audit state, which is going to simply notify you of compliance or non-compliance. So that's a really helpful one if you're trying to just track compliance within your environment, or if you are testing out policies and you don't want to restrict any kind of behavior. Audit's a really great kind of first step into policy where you might want to apply policies, sort of see what information you can collect from them. Maybe you need to fine tune them to make sure you are in fact getting the right information from that policy or the right behavior from that policy. And then another common one would be the deny behavior or the deny effect, which would actually prevent behaviors or changes from happening within the environment. So again, using location as a really simple one here, you might create a policy where you are saying, I can only have resources deployed in the United States. So you would select what your approved regions are, and then policy would really take care of the rest. So if someone tries to create resources in any region outside of the US, that deny effect will actually come into play and prevent them from performing that behavior. So if it's creating a new resource, maybe even an existing resource that's already been created outside of the approved regions, you'll see that you'll actually get those deny effects even on existing resources if they're being modified after a policy is created. So really helpful things there to kind of put those guardrails in place and make sure that people are in fact complying to the standards that you have defined for your environment. So with that, a couple other examples were here. Maybe you want to only allow certain types of resources in your environment. So maybe you've gone through and you've defined your governance strategy, but you've only defined it for a particular set of resources that you think are applicable to your environment or your workload, and you haven't really covered the full spectrum of what's in Azure, and you want to make sure that people aren't just deploying anything and everything in the environment. So you might limit what's allowed to be created. Again, you might limit regions. You may want to enforce the tag on all of your resources. So maybe it's a cost center within a certain resource group. You want to make sure everything in that resource group has the appropriate cost center tag. And it could also, again, be enforcing naming conventions. So if you have a prefix or a suffix at the end, you can use policy to actually make sure that those prefix or suffixes are in place when you are creating resources. So with that, Alexandra, to you for some cool demos.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Awesome. So now we're back in the portal, but this time we're going to be starting out somewhere different with the policy portion of this. So right now we can see the scope being my trade research production portion, we have our just initial policy compliance outlined here. So this is different policies that are applied within our Azure estate, making sure that they're compliant. So we're about 80% of overall resource compliance so far, and we can even see like individually what is compliant and what isn't. And so here we also have just some information on the non-compliant initiatives. Initiatives are just like groups of policies. So if you have a collection of similar base policies, we can have them all grouped here. And then we also have just non-compliant policies in general, so about 34. And so just to get more into the definitions of this, we can say, for example, we want to have our required tags on all of our resources within Azure. And so as with the portal loads, you can see we have a bunch of built-in policies that are Microsoft managed. So here we can have the ability to have already pre-baked ones that we'd want to apply to our resources. We also have the ability to make custom policies if you have a very specific Azure business business case for this, but yeah, we can usually start out with the built-in. So I'm just going to type in the require a tag and its value on different resources, and just takes you over to the actual definition itself. And just going through a little more in detail with the definition, we have just the different properties that are aligned with this. So just a lot of the metadata that is put into place. Then we have parameters. And so with the parameters, these are, you can think of them like variables, things we can change out to meet whatever need we have. So in this case, we have the tag name and the tag value that we want to make sure adheres to this compliance. And then finally, we have just the policy logic itself as the policy rule. So here's the policy rule. This is just stating if the policy does not adhere to these tag name and value, then you would deny. So just highlighting a bit more of the effects that Jennifer was talking about earlier as well. This will just stop you from making these types of resources. But we have a few different others in addition to deny and audit, as we were talking about earlier, but like deploy if not exists or appending. So there's really a few different ways we can have different effects in order to take place and keep us on track. So for now, I'm just going to assign this policy and just going through the policy assignment process as well. We can set the scope. So I'm just going to set the scope to be within my subscription here and then select this. There's also, if you have a very specific need of like wanting to exclude different resources or things of that nature, if you're trying to test out different things before having this applied, you can have this option as well. And then we're going to go through the basics, and those are fine. Now that we have the parameters, let's say we want to do an environment tag. And so we want to make sure that that environment is production because all of our resources are pointing to that within our subscription. So we keep that here. And then with remediation, so remediation is basically when you have a resource that is in Azure, maybe you made it before this assignment that may not adhere to this right compliance. And so it gives you the option in order to create what we call a remediation task in order to actually fix that. And so it uses what we call like earlier the managed identity in order to do this. But for this purposes, I'm going to skip to the next part. And then with this, we can also give a non-compliance message. So let's say we're trying to make something in the portal and then we do get that deny. How can we mitigate that? So it gives the user a bit more indication around that. So you could say the environment tag is missing. And then review and create. So the assignment is now created. So we have it within Azure. It takes a few minutes to actually take effect. But while we're going through that, we can go look at some other assignments. Now, as you can see, we have this ASC default assignment. So this is pertains to the Defender for Cloud service. So we have a default compliance that is around the Azure Security Benchmark, but also available within Azure is a few other types of compliance. So Jennifer, I just wanted to ask, have you ever really used any of these different types of compliance available?
Yes, I've had a variety of different customers. I've worked with several government customers, so they're always really interested in the regulatory compliance section and making sure that we're putting limits in place to adhere to those. So if you want to talk about those, I'm sure people would be very interested.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, as Jennifer was saying, a lot of different types of compliance are sometimes needed. So, for example, you can even have things like the NIST compliance. Just going to filter this by initiative so you can see a bit easier. But here you can see we have different revisions of NIST compliance, like Rev 4 and 853. So, things of making sure that we can have that compliance within Azure already pre-baked and make sure that we're somewhat available is really a great resource to be able to have. And then as you can see here is just a bunch of different types of policies that really go with the actual compliance itself. They're usually put in audit so we can monitor the effect first of what the policy compliance does. But afterwards, you can also modify those if need be. Awesome. Then also just wanted to highlight another thing on policy. So we have in kind of here locations and different types of policies. So we have another thing called exemptions within policy. So this is where we can create an exemption that is meant to not evaluate within our actual compliance in order to make sure that we can still keep our score high if we have other means of doing so. So for example, we have our different scope that we can put our exemption in. So we can say, let's put it in. I want to exempt it for my docs resource group. I want to make sure I can have these different locations available for it now. And let's say I want to, we have a couple categories here. We can either have waiver, which is just make sure it doesn't evaluate in our compliance state here. And with that waiver one, we can even set some expiration time for it, say if you just want to test something out. Or we can have mitigated. So this exemption is granted because you already have it in a different way, like you're already satisfying that need. So I'm just going to put waiver for this specific resource group on the allowed locations and then review and create. So yeah, so if we go to the exemptions, we can now see it here as well. But yeah, so this is just a general policy examples. You know, there's different types of compliance that are available that are, you know, the regulatory compliance version, but also the Microsoft like built-in Azure policies that are available for you to use at your discretion and what you need for your business needs, and really trying to make sure that you can keep users within your Azure environment within a certain level of guardrails.
Quick comment on the regulatory compliance piece.
Yeah.
The initiatives in that space are growing all the time. So if you find that there are not initiatives aligned to maybe your regional regulatory compliance needs, please send feedback to us here at Microsoft through the portal. You can reach out to Alexandra and myself on LinkedIn as well. We work with the product groups with our relationship with the FastTrack team. So it's a really great position for us to share those needs. So if you find that you're not seeing built-in initiatives in that space, there's a lot of really great development happening there. And we're always looking for new customer interest in that area. So just a call for any feedback.
Thanks for the call out, definitely. Awesome. So I'm going to actually pass it back to you, Jennifer, so we can now go into more of our cost management portion of this.
Sounds great. Okay, so cost management is a practice around making sure that we are monitoring our costs, that we have the appropriate accountability aligned with our costs, and that we are ultimately optimizing our costs. So if we can spend less, we want to do that, and we want to make sure that we're not losing performance when we do that. So it's kind of a practice, and you'll go through this in repeated cycles over time. But with that, there's lots of different ways that you can manage your costs in Azure. Ultimately, we have a cost management service that makes it pretty easy for you to correlate costs to service types, your hierarchy. So if you want to group your costs by subscription, resource group, management group, you can organize them that way. If you want to filter your costs according to tags, so maybe you are implementing chargeback with those cost center tags, it's a really great way to visualize or develop reporting on that tool or that information. So lots of different ways you can ultimately monitor. Accountability, again, you might be using tags to track accountability for costs of your Azure resources, or you could even just be keeping the generic scope around accountability for costs with the default subscription billing. And then optimization, again, kind of comes in a few different forms. That might be optimizing resource usage. So if you are over consuming Azure resources or under consuming Azure resources, making sure you have those right sized so that your costs are in alignment with the services you're actually using. And then also making sure that if you are committed to using certain services over time, that you can take advantages of some long-term commitments where you might actually get cost discounts for using those resources for an extended period. So there's lots of different ways you can improve costs over time. That can also even be modernizing, going from your infrastructure approach to a platform as a service approach. So really awesome suggestions in there around ways to optimize, but we're going to jump to Alexandra for another demo on some of our cost management tooling.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. So we're going to go back into the portal here and go under where we see cost management. So here, this is already like pre-baked within your Azure subscriptions, just the availability to have the cost analysis portion of this. So we're greeted here with a few different charts that are available. So the first one is mainly just around accumulated costs throughout your environment. The second one's on the bottom. These are more indicative of the different types of services. So you can have for storage or Azure Bastion, virtual machines. We can really see these donut charts to figure out other types of means of where our spend is going. So we also have here location, and then we also have the resource groups as well. And so right here, it also just gives you the actual cost. Well, euros and US are pretty on point nowadays, so they are very on track. So now we have at the top here just different filters that we can specify what we want to see here based off of these different types of views. So for example, we have a few different types of views already built in, but we can create some just to actually be more specific to our different types of departments or different areas that we want to highlight. So just to see a couple of the built-in views, we already went through accumulated costs, but another interesting one is definitely the cost by resources. So here we have some of our resources that were already deployed, and we can see a lot more specifics around the different types of services and what is actually being used for these services as well. So in addition to creating a view, let's say I want to show my accumulated costs over the last 7 days. And also I want to add in a filter here. So let's do it for tag. And the tag I want to highlight here is just our department tag. So right now we have our IT tag that we made already. And then we see just our accumulated costs throughout here. Right now we can do grouping. So let's say I want to see the accumulated cost just by the services, because I want to monitor which services I have are accumulating which costs in this. So as you can see, we get a nice little area graph as to what is being accumulated in this past week. But we can also see different types of views. So we can see like daily costs, monthly costs. So really the granularity is up to you. And then also the views are changeable as well. So you could see like column views for each day, or just different types of groupings based off of the different storage, like different types of resources and things like that. But for this, I want to have this view of the area graph just to see my accumulated view. So if we want to save this just to keep in handy for later, we can have this saved as this week of September costs for the IT department. So here we can save this view. And now the view is saved. So now if I ever just want to like handily go up to this view, I could just have it on hand and be like able to show it to different types of people, like, hey, maybe we're spending too much on virtual machines this week. So we could really cut down on that.
Alexandra, how far back can you go in looking at your cost history?
Yeah, great question. So you can actually go back within the year. So as you can see down here, you can have the last 12 months. You can see right now, don't have too much data when it comes to that, but you can even have different custom date ranges as well. So you can really customize it in order to make sure that you are showing what you want to see within your Azure environment. Awesome. So now let's go back to our regular point of this view. And let's say we want to create a budget. Now, I know we all have different types of budgets we want to adhere to, and just doing it within the Azure portals makes it a lot easier. So we go here and we can add a budget. So right now I'm just going to keep it within the scope of our production research subscription. And then let's say I want to make sure that it's $100. So I'm going to say $100 budget. And so here you can have different periods that you can outline here as well. So you have the invoices and then also the calendar month. So I'm going to do it more so by the calendar months, but you can also do it based off of your invoices as well. And I'm just going to do this. I want to keep this budget till the end of the year. So here I'll put in the $100 budget. As you see, also it has kind of a rough forecast for you that it makes within this cost data. And then as we do the budget, let's say we want to have these conditions be like the actual budget. You could also do forecasted, but I want to have like 80% of my budget. I wanted to make sure it alerts me when it gets to about $80. So we have within here also these things called action groups. And with action groups, you're able to perform different actions on the budgets that you may have, because when it does have these alerts, it would just send an email normally, not exactly put any actions on it or delete different resources. So it's more for awareness. So for here, we're going to put an action group, and it usually has to be with a resource group, just the entity itself. So let's put it with the docs one for now. And then we can make it a global. And so I'm going to have this be a send email to owner group. And so this will send email to the owner of this production subscription. And then going into notification types. So they have some built-in ones as well. So you can either go back to those Azure Manager resource roles, or the R roles. We can indicate the owner, and then okay. And then we have the name we can have as sub-owner. But alternatively, you can also do it via email or text message or even by the phone as another way to do this. After this, we go through to the action. So this is kind of taking more actions on what we do have when we do hit the threshold that is outlined here. And so we have different options when it comes to doing like an automation runbook, Azure function, ITSM ticket. So really a lot of different ways that you can incorporate different actions you're taking into this.
Alexandra,
Oh
sorry,
yeah.
quick
No worries.
interruption. I was just going to call out if you had a scenario where maybe you have a sandbox or a test environment where, maybe these aren't production resources, and if you're trying to limit budget on that, the action group option with the runbook, there are some built-in runbooks if you're not super familiar with Azure Automation and creating that. So you may want to use one of the built-in runbooks. There's one to actually just turn off your virtual machines, and that will effectively stop some of your billing. So it's a really helpful one if you are trying to limit some of those costs. Yeah, she can show you a great example here. But yeah, there's a stop VM automatic runbook that's already pre-built for you. So it's a really helpful one if you are trying to set budgets on your test or sandbox environments. Just if you forget to turn things off, it's a good backup plan to have in place.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for that call out.
It's a popular one. I've used it in my own environment.
Yeah, it definitely helps to save a bit.
Mhm.
Yes. Awesome. So for this, we're going to put our department tag on here as well, just to keep up with our tagging. And then, oh, okay. So one moment, I think, because I had the actions. Yeah. And then create. Oh, see, this is our policy going back to work with us.
You missed your
So,
tags.
yeah, missed my environment tag. So it's really helpful to have that in handy. So now I have my environment tag here as prod. That's the one that it's looking for. Awesome. So now we successfully created that. So we're going to go actually back to our budget. And once we get that, the action group here, so now we know to send the email to owner. It also asks just for initial email in order for it to send as well, just to alert different recipients. And also you can have different language preferences as well when it comes to how you get these alerts. So available in several different languages in order to fit those needs. And so now we're just going to create the budget. And awesome. So our $100 budget was created. And so as we go back into the portal, it will show our $100 budget. I need to change the here. Yes. Okay, great. So that's probably about it on the cost management side of things. So it really is a great area in order to make sure that everything within your Azure environment, you can monitor a lot of that cloud spend that you have and pretty intuitive as to how to use as well. But yeah, with that, I think we're gonna take it back to the slides just to close out.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, well, we'll just quickly summarize what we walked through today. So the objectives that we approached earlier were just kind of summarizing what we'd covered, but we organized some resources by walking through how to implement a management group hierarchy, as well as develop your naming and tagging standards. We identified our identity structure and practiced how to apply those role-based access control permissions, as well as creating custom roles. We talked about monitoring compliance with Azure Policy and aligning that to support us through our tagging standards that we showed in today's demo. And then we also are walking through providing accountability and visibility into your cloud spend across your business units, your departments, your cost centers, those types of resources. So with that, if you liked the content that we went through today, we have additional learning resources for you. These are some guided modules that you can follow with activities that you can also participate in your own environment. So the link that you see here will take you to those resources, and you can keep on learning how to implement governance in your own environment. And if you liked this format of session, we have some great sessions coming up. With our Ignite conference, we are hosting lots of different topics. The next one that will be scheduled is the Azure Networking Fundamentals on October 4th. So if you would like to join another session like today's and get involved with our engineers and ask questions, this is a really great format for you. And if not, you can always come back and watch those recordings at a later time. There's also additional sessions that you can join. Some of the links that you see here will take you to the additional sessions that will be hosted after the networking fundamentals. I think we have about 10 minutes left in our stream today. So if we have questions that you want to throw our way, we'll try to kind of run through a couple of those before we sign off. So we'll let our moderators maybe just toss us a few of those questions that they think would be great for us to share with everyone. And if this is the last that we see you today, we really appreciate you being here with us. And we hope that you enjoyed our session and learned a good bit about Azure governance, at least enough to maybe get you started in your governance journey.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.